She thought no human could defeat her. The truth left her stunned. The grand arena of eternity was older than most stars it had existed before civilizations rose, and would likely endure long after they fell suspended in the void of a dying system. The arena was a colossus of celestial engineering, its walls, forged from the remains of collapsed neutron stars it stands, stretching infinitely, accommodating thousands of species, some bound by time, others unshackled by it. Warriors from across the cosmos battled here not for survival, not for conquest, but for the singular and intoxicating thrill of proving themselves. Selivar had proven herself countless times as she strode through the corridors leading to the combat floor. She barely spared a glance at the towering murals depicting past champions. Most were forgotten now, their names mere echoes in the archive of eternity. She smirked. None had lasted as long as she had a voice, crackled over the intercom smooth and rehearsed. Ladies, gentlemen, non-corporeal entities, and those who defy classification, welcome once again to the grand arena. Tonight an immortal stands, undefeated, a warrior whose blade has carved through time itself, the elegant executioner, the starborn blade, the eternal Selivara. The roar of the crowd reverberated through the metal corridors, a cacophony of species cheering, whistling, or vibrating in frequencies that made the walls hum. Selivara paused before the final doorway, rolling her shoulders. Her long ears twitched, sensing the anticipation. Beyond, she stepped into the arena, the artificial sun blazing overhead, casting golden light across the vast combat ground. The crowd was a swirling mass of color and sound. Serpent-like beings coiling around floating platforms, gelatinous organisms, shifting hues and excitement. Bipedal creatures banging gauntlets against the railings. The energy of it all was intoxicating. She lifted a hand in acknowledgement, drawing another wave of cheers. Let them adore her, let them bask in the presence of one who had danced through millennia and remained undefeated. The announcer's voice returned, now dripping with theatrical suspense, and now the challenger. A hush fell over the crowd. Anticipation crackled in the air. Selivara smirked, already bored. She had faced deities, biomechanical nightmares, titans that could shatter moons with a whisper. Whoever emerged from that opposite door would be another footnote in her long, illustrious career. The heavy gates across from her rumbled open. A figure stepped forward, silhouetted against the light. The crowd leaned in, expecting something colossal, something shimmering with the weight of cosmic power. Instead, a human. Selivara blinked. She waited for some grand reveal, a transformation, a second form. Nothing happened. The human simply walked forward, hands stuffed in his pockets, moving with an ease that suggested he had either accepted death or hadn't realized where he was. A ripple of confusion passed through the audience, a few awkward coughs. Someone in the back clicked a beacon of abusement. The announcer hesitated before regaining his composure, facing the eternal warrior. A human call. Voss of a brief pause, earth silence, a single tentacled creature in the audience made a weak attempt at applause. Selivar let out a laugh, the sound crisp and delighted. Is this a joke? She asked, tilting her head, her long ears catching the murmur of the crowd. Callum stopped a few feet away, looking up at her. He wasn't small exactly, but compared to the godlike beings she usually fought, he might as well have been a child. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, his stance relaxed, and his expression bored. I get that a lot, he said, voice dry. Seliva folded her arms, studying him. You're either incredibly brave or hopelessly stupid. I like to think I balance both evenly. Somewhere in the crowd, a small laugh. Selivar smirked. Well, I do appreciate a sense of humor. It'll make your inevitable demise more entertaining. Callum's eyes flicked up to the display hovering above the arena, detailing the statistics of the fighters. Next to Selivar's name, a long list of victories stretched like a monument. Next to his a blank slate. He whistled. Wow, impressive record. Ever considered taking up a hobby, knitting? Maybe. She arched a brow. I collect the souls of my fallen enemies. Does that count? Depends. Do you display them in cute little jars? A few more chuckles. From the crowd, even the announcer seemed to stifle a laugh. Salivivera rolled her eyes. Enough talk, human, try not to die. Too quickly, I have a reputation to uphold. She lifted her hand, and a weapon materialized, a blade of condensed starlight, humming with the energy of 1,000 collapsed suns. The ground beneath her feet scorched from its mere presence. Callum cracked his knuckles. Salivera frowned. No weapon, he shrugged. Didn't have time to shop. She stared. You are either the most fearless human in existence or the most profoundly idiotic. I prefer improviser. The audience braced for the fight. The air grew thick with anticipation. Then the announcer's voice boomed. Begin. Salivar moved to the untrained eye. She disappeared. She was speed incarnate, a streak of golden light, cutting through the air, blade poised to sever the mortal before he could even react. It should have been over in an instant, but then Callum dodged. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't divine. He simply stepped to the side. Salivera shot past him, skidding to a halt, eyes wide. The crowd gasped. Callum turned, hands still in his pockets. You're fast. Salivivera whirled, eyes narrowing. You're still alive. Surprised me too. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. Interesting. She lunged again, faster, sharper this time. She swung in an arc designed to slice through dimensions themselves. Callum ducked the blade past, inches above his head, slicing through the very fabric of reality. He let out a breath. Wow, that was close. Saliva's grip on her sword tightened. This was unexpected. The crowd's confusion shifted into intrigue. This was not the quick execution they had expected. Callum rocked on his heels. So you do this often? Saliva narrowed her eyes. This human, she had underestimated him, but she wouldn't make that mistake again. The silence in the grand arena was unnatural. It pressed in like the vacuum of space, as if the entire crowd, thousands of species, some ancient, some newly evolved, had collectively forgotten how to make a sound. Salivara felt it. She had seen many reactions to her battles: awe, terror, the occasional premature celebration from those foolish enough to think they stood a chance, but never this. Never this quiet, cautious curiosity, because Callum Voss was still standing. Saliva rolled her shoulders, her blade still humming with cosmic energy, radiating heat that warped the air around it. She studied him carefully. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He had no armor, no genetic enhancements, no reality warping abilities, no extra limbs or hidden power cores, just a human in a slightly wrinkled jacket, hands still casually in his pockets. She tilted her head. I have questions. Callum raised an eyebrow. Only fair. I have some too. I'll go first. Salivara gestured at him with her free hand. Are you secretly an energy construct, wrapped in a meat suit, a rogue AI who learned to be snarky, some kind of time traveler, who already knows how this fight plays out? Callum thought for a moment. Okay, so fun fact, humans actually have this amazing ability called moving slightly to the left. Salivar narrowed her eyes. That's it. Yep, that's your grand technique. It's really underappreciated. The crowd was beginning to shift from stunned silence to something new. Interested, dramatically. Fine, ask your question, human. Callum tapped his chin. So this whole immortal warrior thing, do you get benefits like a retirement plan? I don't need a retirement plan. I don't retire. No vacations. Why would I take a vacation from being the greatest? Callum nodded thoughtfully. Sounds exhausting. Saliva frowned. She didn't like how casually he was taking this. Warriors either feared her or tried to match her arrogance. This was different. She twirled her blade. You've managed to dodge a few attacks. Congratulations. But I wonder, do you actually know how to fight? Callum sighed. I was hoping to avoid that question. Salivar smirked. You have two options. Either you show me what you're really capable of, or I stop toying with you and end this. Callum stretched his arms, cracking his neck. I mean, I could try running away, but that'd be embarrassing for both of us. Agreed. The audience was leaning in now, eager to see the humans' next move. Salivivera shifted for. Then she vanished, a blink, a shimmer of golden light, and she was gone. Callum's instincts flared. He barely had time to process before she reappeared behind him, blade already mid-swing with a sharp inhale. He twisted Selivera's attack, past inches from his torso close. Enough that the sheer force of it sent a gust of heat across his back, but he was already moving, ducking, turning, staying. Just ahead of the Blad's path, Selivira didn't stop. She pressed forward, slashing. In rapid succession, the light from her weapon illuminating the dust kicked up by their footwork. Each swing was precise, powerful each time. Callum barely evaded. Saliva's smirk widened. Not bad. Thanks, Callum muttered. I try. Then she changed tactics. She aimed not at him, but at the ground. The moment her blade struck the arena floor, erupted energy pulsed outward, cracking the metallic surface and sending shock waves through the field. Callum was thrown backward, rolling as debris flew past him. Saliva advanced, casual in her approach. Dodge all you want, but you can't avoid the battlefield itself. Callum coughed as he scrambled to his feet. Yeah, that's fair. Saliva watched him, waiting, testing. He was good, frustratingly good, but dodging alone wouldn't win him this fight. She took a step forward. Callum moved, not away, toward her. Selivira blinked. Callum closed the distance before she could react, stepping into her space with surprising speed. No weapon, no powers, just pure instinct. And then he ducked under her guard and tapped her shoulder. Lightly, Selivira froze. Callum took a step back, hands raised in surrender. Just wanted to see if I could silence. Then laughter, not from Callum, not from the crowd, from Selivira. She laughed, genuine and bright, shaking her head. All right. Human, that was bold. Callum exhaled. And also possibly the dumbest thing I've ever done, very possibly. She lifted her sword again, but there was something new in her gaze. Amusement, yes, but also curiosity. Tell me, Callum Voss, she said, voice lower now, as if they were the only two in the arena. What's your story? No human should be able to keep up with me. Callum rocked on his heels. Good question. And I have no idea. Salivar squinted. You really don't? Nope, not an enhanced soldier. Nope, no forbidden magic, not even a little. Saliva studied him, searching for any trace of deception, but he was telling the truth, or at the very least, he believed he was interesting. She let out a slow breath. Well, then she tightened her grip on her sword. I suppose I'll just have to figure it out the hard way. Callum groaned. I was afraid you'd say that. Selivira smiled. Then she attacked again. Selivira had fought countless battles across the tapestry of time. She had clashed with warlords who could split planets in half, battled beings whose bodies were composed of sentient plasma, and danced in duels against entities older than galaxies themselves. In all those centuries, she had learned to anticipate the movement of her foes, to predict their patterns, to understand their weaknesses before they themselves even knew them. And yet this human, this ordinary, unremarkable, weaponless human, was still standing, still dodging, still talking, just saying. Callum said between evasive rolls, you could give me like a 1-second head start. Selivira swung her blade, the edge singing as it cut through the air. Callum ducked, narrowly avoiding a strike that would have turned most warriors into a smoldering memory. I already gave you several seconds, she replied. Yeah, but I meant like in a friendly, non-lethal way. Selibar sighed dramatically. You are very bad at reading the room, Callum. I choose to believe that's a compliment. She lunged forward again, a burst of speed that would have overwhelmed anyone else. And yet Callum moved not with godly reflexes or supernatural grace, but with a strange, almost comedic awkwardness that somehow kept him a step ahead of each attack. It was less a warrior's instinct and more a drunk man's uncanny ability to not spill his drink while stumbling through a crowded bar. The audience, once skeptical, was now entirely engrossed. The fight should have been over by now. Instead, it was becoming something fascinating. Selivira struck again, her blade arcing downward. Callum twisted the attack, missing by inches, but this time he didn't just dodge, he reached out in a motion so quick it almost seemed foolish. Callum flicked Selivira's ear. Selivira froze. Callum mid-dodge realized what he had done and immediately regretted it. Oh no, Selivar's eye twitched. The audience gasped. Somewhere an 8-limbed reptilian warrior Dropped his drink you, she said, voice calm too. Calm just flicked my ear. Callum took a cautious step back. Technically, I think. It was more of a playful tap. Selivar stared at him. Do you have a death wish? I would like to formally state that my hand acted without my permission. Seliva exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her sword. Then, instead of immediately vaporizing him, she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a rare sound, one that made the crowd lean in confused, yet intrigued. Selivara shook her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. I should incinerate you for that. Callum straightened up, cautiously hopeful. Boot. She sighed, but I have to admit I'm starting to enjoy this. Callum blinked. Wait, really? Yes. She stretched her arms, rolling her shoulders. It's been a long time since I fought someone who actually surprised me. Not to be rude, but is that a compliment to me or an insult to your past opponents? A bit of both. Fair. Selivar tilted her head. However, that does not mean I'm going to go easy on you. Callum groaned. I was afraid of that. Then, without warning, she vanished. This time, Callum barely had a chance to react. She reappeared inches in front of him. Her speed unnatural, her blade already in motion. But Callum didn't dodge the same way he had before. Instead, he reacted differently. He shifted his weight just slightly and let himself fall backward. Selivar's blade cut through the space where his torso had been a fraction of a second ago. Callum hit the ground and rolled, using the momentum to flip himself onto his feet. Selivar's eyes narrowed. That wasn't just luck, that was adaptation. Interesting, she murmured. Callum brushed dust off his jacket. Not going to lie, I had no idea if that was going to work. Selivara tapped a finger against her chin. I was right about you. Right about what? You're not fighting like a human. Callum blinked. I what? She studied him carefully. Your instincts, your reactions, they're too fast. Not impossibly fast, but just fast enough to be unnatural. Callum scratched the back of his head. Well, I did drink a lot of coffee before this. Maybe that's doing something. Selivar smirked. No, it's something else, and I intend to figure out what. Callum sighed. Can't we just assume I'm lucky and move on? No, didn't think so. Selivar lowered her blade slightly. Tell me, Callum, what do you know about your own past? Callum opened his mouth and hesitated. That was a weird question, but now that he thought about it, he furrowed his brow. I mean, I know I'm human, grew up on Earth, pretty normal life. I think you think. He frowned. Why did that suddenly feel like a difficult question? He paused. Okay, this is weird, but I don't actually remember how I got here. Selivar's gaze sharpened. You don't? I remember signing up for something, a tournament, but the details are kind of fuzzy. Selivar tilted her head. That's unusual. Callum rubbed his temples. The more he tried to recall the stranger, it felt like his memories were incomplete. The crowd murmured, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Selivar exhaled. I knew there was something odd about you, and now I want to know more. Callum groaned. Let me guess, you're going to keep fighting me until you figure it out. Exactly. Callum muttered under his breath. Great, I love being a science experiment. Selivara lifted her blade again, her stance shifting this time. There was no more mockery in her gaze, just determination. Callum sighed and cracked his knuckles. All right, fine, but can I at least get a 5-minute break? Siva smirked. Absolutely not. And with that she attacked again. Callum had long suspected that his life choices were at best questionable now, as he barely twisted out of the way of a plasma blade that could cut through a battleship. He felt rather confident about that assessment. Selivar wasn't holding back anymore. The playful smirks were gone. The teasing remarks had faded now. Her golden eyes gleamed with something sharper, something far more dangerous, genuine curiosity. And Callum was beginning to understand why that was worse than anger. I have to admit, Selivar said, pivoting with the grace of a dancer as her sword slashed through the air. I almost feel bad for you. Callum ducked, narrowly avoiding getting a new and exciting haircut via decapitation. Oh, because I'm currently fighting for my life against a literal immortal. Selivar smirked. Because I have questions and I always get my answers. Callum groaned. You could just. Oh, I don't No, ask I prefer a more hands-on approach, another lunge, another near miss. Callum stumbled back, catching himself just before he tripped over a particularly unfriendly-looking piece of broken arena floor. He exhaled sharply. This would be a lot easier if I actually knew what answers you were looking for. Saliva's blade glowed, humming with energy. I want to know why you're still standing. Callum snorted. Trust me, I'm just as confused as you are. Salivara studied him. She could tell when someone was lying. This human wasn't interesting. She darted forward again, faster this time. Callum reacted instinctively, rolling to the side, except this time, he rolled directly into her trap. Saliva had anticipated his dodge. Before Callum could recover, her knee connected with his stomach hard. The impact sent him flying back, crashing into the cracked metallic floor with an undignified grunt. The arena let out a collective gasp, the tension in the air tightening like a coiled spring. Salivar took slow steps toward him, blade lowered, but still humming with power. Stay down, she said, voice softer now, not mocking, not cruel. Just a suggestion. Callum groaned. You're going to have to speak up. I think you just relocated all of my organs. Saliva sighed. You're surprisingly resilient for someone who keeps making bad decisions. Callum rolled onto his back, staring up at the sky. Yeah, that's been a theme. Salivro stood over him, now tilting her head. You're not enhanced, you're not trained, and yet you've lasted longer than any human I've ever faced. That's not normal. Callum exhaled. Yeah, I figured. Salivara crouched, resting her elbow on her knee. As she studied him, I think I know what's happening here. Oh, good. Callum muttered, I'd love some exposition. Salivar ignored the sarcasm. Something brought you here. Callum raised an eyebrow. Yeah, the tournament invitation. No. Salivara tapped her fingers against her chin. Something else, something bigger. Callum sighed. Okay, great, super ominous. But I feel like that's a problem for future Callum to deal with. Salivara smirked. Oh, I agree. Then she flicked his forehead. Callum winced. Was that really necessary? Absolutely. Callum groaned as he sat up. His ribs ocked, his limbs felt like jelly, and yet he was still here. Still conscious, still alive. Weird. Salivar offered a hand. Come on, human, I'm not done with you yet. Callum hesitated. You're not going to throw me across the arena again, are you? No promises. Callum sighed and took her hand as she pulled him to his feet. He muttered, I feel like this is the start of a very complicated friendship. Salivara smirked. Oh, it's going to be worse than that. And for the first time in the fight, Callum wasn't entirely sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Callum had done many dumb things in his life. Once in college, he had tried to microwave an entire carton of eggs because he thought, hey, this should be fine. It was not fine. The ensuing explosion had made his dorm smell like sulfur for weeks. That had been a poor life decision, but signing up for a galactic tournament full of literal death gods and immortal warriors that was rapidly taking the crown. Salivara, his long-eared opponent, had finally stopped trying to slice him in half. That should have been a good thing, but now she was circling him with the slow, predatory grace of someone who had simply switched from destroy mode to study mode, which honestly felt worse. I feel like I should be concerned about how much you're staring at me. Callum muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Salivara smirked. You are a curiosity. Oh, great, I love being a science project. The crowd had gone eerily quiet. Even the rowdiest alien warlords, the ones who had been throwing credits around like confetti at the start of this fight, had fallen into hush murmurs. The fight should have ended ages ago, but somehow, impossibly, Callum was still standing. Saliva finally stopped circling. I have a theory. Oh, good, theory's my favorite. Callum groaned. Let me guess, you think I'm some kind of lost prince. Secretly a robot, maybe. I've got hidden powers, and I just need to believe in the heart of the cards. Sivar blinked. The heart of the what? Never mind. She studied him with those sharp golden eyes. You don't fight like a trained warrior. You don't move with the instinct of a soldier. And yet she tapped her chin. Your body is reacting in ways that shouldn't be possible for a human. Callum sighed. Are you saying I should be dead? Yes, well, That's comforting. Salivar took a step forward. There's something inside you. Something unnatural, something that isn't human. Callum raised a hand. Hold up, I've been human my whole life, thank you very much. Last I checked, I still require oxygen, still need food, and still have existential crises. At least twice a week. Saliva arched an elegant brow, and yet you survived a direct hit from me, a hit that should have shattered your ribs. Callum frowned. I mean, I feel shattered. Does that count? Salivary ignored his joke. I think you've been altered. Callum felt a pit form in his stomach. Altered? Yes, she tilted her head. And I don't think you even know it. Callum rubbed his temples. Great, fantastic. So what? Someone just casually tweaked me like I'm some kind of lab rat. Siva smirked. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened in this tournament. Callum opened his mouth, then shut it. That was a deeply unsettling statement. All right, he said, inhaling slowly. So let's assume for a second that I am in fact some kind of secret science experiment. What do we do about that? Salivar grinned. Simple. We push you until we figure out what happens. Callum groaned. Of course, before he could protest further, Salivara lunged again, her speed blurring the edges of reality. Callum barely had time to react. But something happened. His body moved before his brain could even process the attack, not just instinct. Something deeper, something embedded in his very cells. His hands shot up, intercepting her blade, not with a dodge, not with a block, but by simply catching it. The crowd gasped. Salivara's eyes widened. Callum stared at his own hand, now gripping the burning plasma edge of her weapon. Oh, he muttered, then the pain hit. Oh no, he immediately let go, shaking his hand violently. Ow, oh, that was a terrible idea. Salivara, to her credit, looked more fascinated than victorious. You caught it. Callum winced. Yeah, well, my skin disagrees. Salivara studied him, then grinned. This is going to be fun. Callum groaned. That is not the word I would use. Salivara lifted her blade again. Try not to die, human. Callum cracked his knuckles, wincing slightly. Yeah, no pressure. And then the fight truly began. Callum had long suspected that his body was bad at listening to his brain. Usually this was limited to things like, maybe don't eat that gas station sushi, or you should really go to bed before 3:00 a.m. But now, as he dodged yet another swing of Salivar's plasma blade, he realized his body had truly taken its rebellion to the next level. Because it was moving, before he could even think again, Salivar came at him. Fast, too fast, a blur of motion, her sword a glowing arc of destruction, and yet his body reacted on its own, twisting, just enough for the blade to pass harmlessly by his ribs. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, breath coming fast. Saliva smirked. See, you're adapting. Callum groaned. Oh, good love, that for me. The crowd was beyond invested. Now even the most battle-hardened warriors, the ones who had been betting against him since the start, were leaning forward, eyes locked onto the impossible fight unfolding before them. A human should not have lasted this long. A human should not have been matching an immortal warrior's speed. A human should not have. Callum reached up mid-dodge, barely thinking about it, and caught Salivara's wrist before her next strike could land. The audience gasped. Salivara's golden eyes widened. Callum blinked. Oh, huh, that was neat. Saliva yanked her arm free and took a step back, her smirk growing wider. Oh, this is getting interesting. Callum exhaled sharply. I feel like you and I have different definitions of interesting. Sivra ignored his complaint, tilting her head as she studied him. Your reflexes are improving at an unnatural rate, not just combat instinct, muscle memory. Your body is adjusting faster than should be physically possible. Callum frowned. Great, so I'm a knockoff action hero now. Salivara smirked something like that. Callum rubbed the back of his neck. So what do we do now? Keep fighting until I unlock Ultra Instinct or something? Sivar chuckled. You joke, but I am genuinely tempted. Callum sighed. Of course, you are. The crowd, sensing a lull in the action, began chanting, some demanding the fight continue, others demanding an explanation for what the hell was going on. Saliva lifted a hand, silencing them instantly. Callum let out a low whistle, got to admit I could use that trick in meetings. Selivar shook her head, amusement flickering across her face. Before she turned serious again, Callum, he blinked. She had never used his name like that before, not as a joke, not as an insult, but like something important was about to happen. Yeah. She took a slow step forward, lowering her blade. Something was done to you, and I don't think you even know what. Callum inhaled deeply. Yeah, you mentioned that. Not exactly comforting by the way she nodded. Then let's find out the truth before Callum could react. Seliva moved fast, but not to attack. She placed 2 fingers against his forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a shock wave of energy rippled through his skull. A memory surfaced. No, not a memory. Something deeper, something buried, something hidden beneath layers and layers of ordinary life. He wasn't just a normal human. He had been chosen, altered, made into something else. His eyes widened. Selivar grinned. There it is. Callum staggered back, breath hitching. What the hell was that? Seliva lowered her hand. The beginning of the truth. Callum clenched his fists, his pulse hammering in his ears. So what now? Seliva smirked. Now we see how far you can go. Callum had never been great at handling life-changing revelations. When he'd found out as a kid that Santa wasn't real, he'd cried for 3 hours and then, in a fit of misguided vengeance, tried to eat an entire gingerbread house in one sitting. That had ended with both a stomach ache and a deep sense of regret. Now, standing in the middle of the arena, his body humming with something strange and ancient, he felt about the same. Salivara watched him with those sharp golden eyes, her blade still lowered, her stance relaxed, but there was an expectant air about her, like she was waiting for him to put the pieces together. He took a slow breath. So let me get this straight. She arched an eyebrow, amused. Please, I'm not just some guy who signed up for a tournament he had no business entering. Correct? I've been altered somehow, made into something more. Also correct, and you knew about it before I did. Saliva smirked. I suspected. Callum sighed. Right, cool, love that for me. He rubbed his temples. You know, a heads up would have been nice. Maybe a letter, a mysterious prophecy, literally anything that would have prevented me from having a minor existential crisis. Mid-fight, Selivara chuckled. Where's the fun in that? Callum shot her a look. Oh, I don't know, maybe in the part where I don't question my entire identity while dodging plasma swords. She shrugged. You handled it well enough, he groaned. Debatable. The crowd still buzzing with confusion was growing. Restless whispers spread like wildfire. The tournament had expected a decisive end, either Callum's spectacular failure or some dramatic final blow. Instead, they had gotten this. Celibar turned, addressing the audience with a sweep of her arm. The battle has been fought. The truth has been revealed. This human is not ordinary, nor is he unworthy. Murmurs turned into shouts. Some cheered, others protested, but none could deny the undeniable. Callum had survived, adapted, and somehow stood as her equal. Callum exhaled. So what happens now? Do I get a medal? Maybe a cool space cape? Saliviver laughed softly. The tournament has no rule against an unfinished match, but I have my answer. I do not need to fight you further. Callum blinked. Wait, you're saying we're done? She nodded. You have already won something more valuable than the match itself. He frowned. Which is? She took a step closer, lowering her voice. My respect. Callum hesitated. Out of everything, he'd expected victory. Defeat, maybe even an elaborate prank. He hadn't expected that. Salivara, the immortal warrior, the undefeated champion, the smug, long-eared force of nature, respected him. That was new, and maybe, just maybe, he kind of liked it. The officials, scrambling to make sense of what had just happened, finally declared the match a draw, an unheard of result in a tournament where fights were meant to end in absolute victory or crushing defeat. Callum sighed in relief. Well, I'll take that, Salivara smirked. I suppose you will. As the arena began to clear out, Callum turned to her. So what happens to you now? Back to fighting, conquering, casually intimidating the masses? Salivar chuckled. Perhaps, but she gave him a look assessing. I think I'd Rather see where you go next, Callum. Blinked, wait, you're coming with me, she. Grinned, disappointed. He snorted more like deeply concerned for my personal safety. Salivar smirked, oh Callum, the real fun is just beginning. And with that, they stepped out of the arena together. The end.